We are in Kufid Gimel. We had started Halacha Beis, and really Halacha Beis and Gimel go together. The part that's to do with Halacha Gimel we did earlier. I want to say something more on the Mechaber, and then we'll get to the Ramah. Okay. I said something last week, and we're sort of correcting that. In the Mechaber's case, it's talking about a mixture of two different foods. Some are nechachai and some are not nechachai. Okay? You have a soup. Okay, and there's potatoes and carrots and celery. Some are nechachai and some are not. So you go, what's the ikr and the tafel? So how come the Mechaber says a case of nechachai, not nechachai? And he doesn't give a case of Oleh Shulchan and not Oleh Shulchan. Why doesn't he say you have a soup, some of the ingredients in there are Oleh Shulchan and some of the ingredients are not Oleh Shulchan? Now I said this because it's all the same, but changing it now, I'm asking you a question. What's the difference? Why doesn't he say that case also? If some of the things are oil and some are not, let's say, I don't know, what you think of what the soup has to be like, to be some are oil and some are not oil.
So talking about, to make a determination if this Michael as a whole is considered oil, or to just say, well, we're not talking about this Michael as a whole, we're talking about if it's made up of components, that those components individually are Oleh Shulchan Malachim, then this would be something that's Oleh Shulchan Malachim, whether it is or not, but this thing itself, Oleh Shulchan Malachim.
I'm not sure if those two things that you said are different.
Yes, of course they're different.
Okay, what's the difference?
Suppose you have a salad, that the salad is Oleh Shulchan Malachim. Okay, it's a fancy comprehension, Oleh Shulchan Malachim. It's made up of three ingredients. 2 out of the 3 alone are not Oleh Shulchan Malachim. But the thing, after it's done, made together, it could be Oleh Shulchan Malachim. Or the reverse could be true. You can have something that's, right now it's not a kosher thing, it's not Oleh Shulchan Malachim. But the individual ingredients, potatoes, and Oleh Shulchan Malachim, and that.
But the way they put them together, they're not Oleh Shulchan Malachim.
Right.
Now, if I care, but the other way around, they're not. So
whatever, it could be both. You can have both.
So that's my question. Why isn't the Mechaber saying that kind of a case? Why isn't he telling us that if you have this mixtures in either way, I'm not saying that it should be always oil now, that the ingredients either are oil but together they're not oil, or they're not oil but together they are oil. Why doesn't he say that case? What do you do in that case? Does that food require Bishul or doesn't it Bishul?
You look at the finished product, but
so the answer is, the simple answer is,
so which one do you want Mechaber to say? Which are
either case, tell whatever it is for Nechachai, he tells you, go by the Ikr and not by the Tafel. Tell me what I'm supposed to do when if it's Oleh Shulchan Malachim, if you have a mixture. So the simple answer is what David's trying to say, and the reason why you don't think it's a question is because, we have a rule that we don't look at, foods, whether food is nechachai or not nechachai, depends on the ingredient. Potatoes are not nechachai, and carrots are nechachai. So we now have a shayla. What do? Is it nechachai or is it not nechachai? Because part of it is and part of it is not. But Oleh Shulchan Malachim, there's no such thing that potatoes are Oleh Shulchan Malachim. It depends how you prepared them. Right? We talked about this a few times ago. Either potatoes are Oleh Shulchan, potatoes are not Oleh Shulchan Malachim, not Oleh. Depends how you prepared them. So if it's obvious that you look at the soup as a whole. If you made this is a soup or the salad or whatever you made, is it Oleh Shulchan Malachim or is it not Oleh Shulchan Malachim? There's no such thing as saying, you can't say, this potatoes are Oleh Shulchan Malachim. But in this situation they're not. If in this situation they're not, then they're not Oleh. And even if they're never Oleh, but the way you prepared them they're Oleh, so they are Oleh Shulchan Malachim.
Maybe it's not true. Maybe the way that, if you picked out the thing, let's say it's a cooked potato. Cooked potato could be Oleh Shulchan Malachim. When you mix in this type of thing, maybe it's not Oleh Shulchan Malachim.
So if you cooked it in a way that's not Oleh Shulchan Malachim, you made potato salad, okay, and potato salad is not Oleh Shulchan Malachim, but you didn't make the potatoes first and put them in. You made it in a way that it was already cooked up in a way that's not Oleh Shulchan Malachim. So it's not Oleh Shulchan Malachim. What is the difference if I could have made the potatoes a different way? I could have made them a different way, but I didn't. I made them this way. The way I made them, they're not Oleh Shulchan Malachim.
But this is mamish, like with potato chips, right? So it's a different type of preparation. It's a thin fried potato. So so this is but Suruzu is not Oleh Shulchan Malachim. But this is getting a little closer here.
Right. That's good. So you're right.
The same as a cooked potato.
Yes, you're right.
Exactly.
There are those who
take a whole Michael out of it.
There are those who take an in-between position about like potato chips. That if instead of saying that we look at the min and say potatoes can be Oleh, so no matter how you prepare potatoes to Oleh, you make it a little bit smaller groups. Let's say fried potatoes and baked potatoes, or thick fried potatoes and thin fried, but then in the little details, but not so much. So then maybe that wouldn't make sense of it. Then we could have come up with a case where there'd be little fine differences where the food sort of is Oleh, but the way it's prepared is not Oleh. Okay, I'm not sure.
What's an example of that?
What you
just mentioned.
what would be,
differences.
in other words, we're within, let's say, the group of cooked potatoes. But we're just saying, the cooked potatoes, that's our Oleh Shulchan Aruch. I happen to cook it in a little bit of a funny way that it's not Oleh Shulchan Aruch. But basically, cooked potatoes are Oleh Shulchan Aruch. So that's like a fine difference. I mean, it's not a matter of cooked, fried, and baked.
Does anybody say that that's considered not Oleh Shulchan Aruch?
That it should depend on the way I cook it? Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. That it should,
Like who?
that's what I'm thinking, then that's why the Mechaber is not even saying the case. Why the Mechaber not telling us a case of food that could be Oleh, could not be? Because we look at the food as is. We look at it in the finished product. Look at the food, it's Oleh or it's not Oleh. What do I care if I could have made it Oleh? Just look at it. How is it? What did I prepare today?
You're saying Mechaber is Mechaber.
Is not. Is Mechaber, right.
Is
That's
Mechaber.
good. That's good. Would say is that it depends.
This is even a finer difference between potato chips and
Right, that's what I'm saying.
So according to you, if you like, it burnt the thing a little bit. If I burnt it, it's not Oleh Shulchan Aruch.
Okay, no, so I wouldn't say that. Okay,
Yeah, that's a fine difference.
okay. So I'll have to think of that. That you're right. Of course, that's not true. So I have to think about that. You're right. And every single way that I cook it, okay. So maybe, okay, we'll think about it. So then you can think about this question. I'm going to tell you about what I really want to tell you was not for this question. That the OU's poskim came up with something, which is a variation of what we're talking about here, like Iker and Tafel, having to do with Oleh Shulchan Aruch, which at first seems like a chiddush. It seems to have come from no place. Okay, I'm going to try to explain what that is. And their shayla was like this. The shayla they were talking about, the example we're going to use that they were talking about was, do you need Bishul Yisroel on water chestnuts? Okay? Water chestnuts? Okay, water chestnuts. What?
They're not edible.
Water chestnuts are not edible raw.
Chinese food.
That they served as part of a Chinese dish, okay? What they call Chinese food, okay? And they look like little hockey pucks, okay? And they come, you buy them in a can, okay? Because no one harvests them in Chicago. They come from China. And they come in a can already cooked, okay? And they're not edible raw. They come already cooked. And what you do is, you then take it and you stir fry it with other vegetables and meat and v'chahena, and you make a dish out of it, okay? Now that finished dish that you make out of it is Oleh Shulchan Aruch. Okay, it's a fine, presentable dish. But the water chestnuts by themselves are not Oleh Shulchan Aruch. I mean, I guess you could eat them. Maybe there are people who eat them, but nobody would eat them as is.
So we go into the store and get packages of them that are edible, just snacking.
Can you really?
Yes.
Okay. You're saying
Are they raw?
raw ones?
No.
Cooked ones.
Cooked ones.
Okay. So I guess people might snack on them. I'm not saying people wouldn't do that, but it's not Oleh Shulchan Aruch like that. You never went to a wedding and they served you a bowl of water chestnuts. I mean, that doesn't work like that. But they could. It has function. Its main use. I don't know what they use them for in China, but the main use here is in ways that are Oleh Shulchan Aruch. They make these dishes out of them. So the shayla was, does the original cooking need to be Bishul Yisroel? Because the food is cooked and it's going to be Oleh Shulchan Aruch. That's what's going to happen to it. And there's a bunch of other examples. Chow mein noodles, there's croutons, there's a bunch of different examples like this.
I think you answered the question last time, but I don't remember.
Okay.
If you have something that dafka needs to be turned on the fire by a Jew,
Yes.
okay, if dafka needs it, and that product is going to be put into another product that's going to be cooked,
Okay.
okay, does the first product have to be cooked by a Jew in order, trying to change that, the second product being cooked, since it's being cooked by a Jew, would that eliminate the need for the first one?
It would depend. That's a halacha later, whether it was fully cooked the first time or not. If it was only partially cooked in the first cooking, then the later cooking can save it. But if it's fully cooked, it comes out 100% fully cooked, then the second cooking can't help it anymore. Once it's fully cooked, you can't help it anymore. That's what our case is here. The food is already fully cooked the first time around. Okay, think about one of the other examples, chow mein noodles. Okay, you could eat them. You could just eat them, snack on them. But that's not Oleh Shulchan Aruch like that. But if you put them onto, again, the same kind of dish.
Anything you can make to make Oleh Shulchan Aruch.
I know that, but water chestnuts. Think about the food. That their use is in a certain kinds of foods, and those foods are Oleh Shulchan Aruch. That's what you do with them. That's what you're supposed to do with them.
Yeah, but again, you're saying
It's not.
right now it's not, but its use is yes. But anything can be made that way.
No, it's not like saying tofu. Okay, tofu is not Oleh Shulchan Aruch. Could you
What?
throw tofu into a dish
You can make-
that would be Oleh Shulchan Aruch? Yeah, you
You
could.
can make something.
Yes, you could. But here, this is the what you're supposed to do with this food. That's what this is for, is to make things that are.
That's not what it's for. That's what people use it for.
What is it?
That's not what it's for. It's like any other vegetable. Carrots. You can make a fancy carrots, but say anything you could say the way it is now is not. But carrots are probably.
So I ask you, potatoes Oleh Shulchan Aruch. You do lots of things with them, including things that are Oleh Shulchan Aruch. So they would need Bishul Yisroel if you prepared them like that. So here's the guy who made these water chestnuts. When either you'll say to me they're made for Oleh Shulchan Aruch, or if you're going to use them, then you have to get one that will Bishul Yisrael, because they're cooking. You cook these things, these vegetables, they're Oleh Shulchan Aruch. In a normal main use that they have is Oleh Shulchan Aruch, so they should need Bishul Yisrael.
Now, one other question, and this has come up before. That's why I'm going to ask it. Many times, I think Rabbi Lim and I dealt with this. I think a couple of times. No, I think Rabbi Katz now. Things that are kosher and need special attention in the kitchen, the halacha changes diametrically when it comes to a factory. Would that have any...
Yeah, well, we're ignoring that for now. Yes, sometimes there are cases when we make it in fact, right. We're ignoring that. Okay, we're pretending that doesn't exist. Right? Okay. By and large, we ignore that. Okay. So they said, Rabelski, Rabbi Shechta said independently that these don't need Bishul Yisrael. They said why? Because when you're going to make it Oleh Shulchan Aruch, it's never going to be Oleh Shulchan Aruch by itself. It's always going to be Oleh Shulchan Aruch as a Tafel, which is that's why I'm bringing it to this thing. It's a variation of this. It's always Tafel. It's in the dish. The dish is not. This is not. Meat with broccoli. This is not that the broccoli is a main part of the food. This is a small ingredient in a dish that you're making out of this. These water chestnuts. They're a very small part of the food. They're a Tafel. Since they're a Tafel in the food that you're going to be using, that's Oleh Shulchan Aruch, so they don't need to be Bishul Yisrael. Just like the Mechaber said over here, that if something is not Nechel Chai, you have to cook it to eat it. But it's in a soup of a lot of other foods. It doesn't need Bishul Yisrael. It's because it's Tafel to the other foods. So here also, the food is only Oleh Shulchan Aruch as a Tafel, so it doesn't need Bishul Yisrael. Okay, now the obvious...
It would have been considered Oleh Shulchan Aruch, then we need Bishul Yisrael even if somebody was eating it plain.
Right, that's correct. That's correct. You would need it even if you wanted to snack on it. Correct. So the question on what this is, and the question is like this: what are you talking about? In the case of our soup in the Shulchan Aruch, you cooked all the vegetables together. You made a soup, and into that soup you put onions and carrots and celery and potatoes. But the potatoes don't need Bishul Yisrael because there's such a small amount; they're Tafel to the whole soup. But so there we could say when you cooked the soup, it didn't need Bishul Yisrael. But over here, when I cooked the water chestnuts, I cooked them by themselves. I didn't cook them as part of this big dish. You're right. If I would have harvested them off the ground and then cooked them in the dish, you say they're Tafel to everything else. It doesn't need to be Bishul Yisrael. But here, I cooked them by themselves. How can I say that they're Tafel? Because when they get to be Oleh Shulchan Aruch, they're going to be Tafel. Right now, now is when I'm cooking them. When I'm cooking them, they're not Tafel. So what's the difference if they're going to be Tafel tomorrow? Where did that come from? That we should say if it's going to be Tafel when I use it, it's going to be not Oleh Shulchan Aruch. Think about our case, in the case of the soup. Imagine if you cooked the potatoes by themselves, and then you threw them into the soup. That case would need Bishul Yisrael. You wouldn't say, these potatoes are headed for a soup where they're going to be Tafel. You say you cook the potatoes, they need Bishul Yisrael. The fact that you're going to mix them into a soup, that's not going to make it any better.
Yeah, but of course it's different.
Because?
Potatoes are independently Oleh Shulchan Aruch. I mean, how do you say, maybe you have no right, but it's Mr. what they're saying.
I know. I'm just saying, where is it coming from? They didn't. I'm connecting to this din of Tafel, but that's the closest connection we have to a din in Shulchan Aruch about an ikar of Tafel. Where did it come from? Such a thing that should say, since the way it's going to be used on Shulchan Aruch is going to be Tafel, so therefore it's going to help when I cooked it. That's not what the din is. The din is a case where you cooked it as a Tafel. Okay? I'm going to give you two explanations. After I thought about these two explanations, they're really almost the same thing. But two explanations. Okay, one is like this. When you say that a soup that has potatoes in it, we say the potatoes are Tafel, and therefore the soup doesn't need Bishul Yisrael. Okay, that's what we're saying. Really, what we're saying is that when you look at this soup, we are pretending that there's no potatoes in here. Okay, the way we're looking at it is this soup. When you look at the soup, are there things here that need Bishul Yisrael? We say no. There's so much carrots and celery in there that the potatoes don't need Bishul. We're pretending as if there's no potatoes in here. We're saying these are things that are only edible raw. Either potatoes, don't worry about the potatoes. Ignore the potatoes. So the same way that by Nechel Chai we can sort of ignore the potatoes. If we're a little bit more creative, we'll say in the Chinese dish we're also going to pretend there's no water chestnuts in there. We could use the same. Look at it the same way, just like in the soup, there's no potatoes. Also, in the Chinese dish, there are no water chestnuts. In other words, water chestnuts are not Oleh Shulchan Aruch because there's no. You see them in that dish? No, they're not there. The fact that they're Tafel in that dish tells us to say is, don't look at it, we can look at the whole unit. You see water chestnuts? No. I just see vegetables. I just see things that are other things. I don't see the individual things. They lose their individuality as being, you're a water chestnut that needs Bishul Yisroel.
That doesn't answer the question.
Because? That what?
Because you still prepare them separately beforehand.
Right, so the answer is, water chestnuts are not Oleh Shulchan Aruch. You said to me, oh yeah, they are. I see them in this dish. No, you don't see them in the dish. No, they're not there. It's as if that dish doesn't have water chestnuts in it. So the only way that they're eaten is some people will snack on them by themselves, but no one eats them on Shulchan Aruch. So really, it's saying is that the reason why they're not Oleh Shulchan Aruch is because the reason why they don't need Bishul Yisroel because they're not Oleh Shulchan Aruch. You see them at Shulchan Aruch. We're as if pretending that doesn't exist. That case doesn't even exist because the way that they're Oleh Shulchan Aruch is not. They're not there. As if they're being Tafel means that they don't, as if they don't exist. The second way, which if go ahead.
If water chestnuts were made in America, would they come to the same sack din, or is this mamash like a b'diavad?
No, I don't think so. Because they took the other cases that came up with were things that are made right here. This is just, I'm giving you that example. There are other cases that had,
like what?
Like chow mein noodles. Chow mein noodles had other steaks, so that's why I'm not using it as an example. Chow mein noodles. You make those noodles, and then eating them by themselves, they're just a snack. Okay, they're not Oleh Shulchan Aruch, but again, in the same kind of a dish, you would throw them in, and they would be Oleh. Okay.
Restaurants, they serve
They serve what?
Chinese noodles with the sauce.
Okay. No. Okay. Now, the other answer is, and afterwards I realized it's a very similar answer. It's from Stam Keilim. Okay, he's not talking about water chestnuts. You probably never saw one. He's talking about sugar and salt. Okay, he wants to know, it's in the tshuva about other things about sugar, and he at the end sticks in, why don't sugar, and then he says salt need Bishul Yisroel. He says the reason is, his reason is because like this. He says, the thing is, you only need Bishul Yisroel if something's Oleh Shulchan Aruch. That means is that it's only for very chashuv meichels, things that are very fancy or prominent kinds of foods. Those are the kinds of foods that need Bishul Yisroel. And we understand that because those are the things that lead to Kashrus. Okay, you feel appreciative. He says, if you have a food that nobody eats by itself, sugar, no one eats a spoonful of sugar. If you don't eat the food by itself, how can you say that it's a chashuv of food? That tells us inherently that it's not a chashuv of food. If no one ever eats it by itself, it's only a salt. If you don't have salt by itself, so salt must not be it's a chashuv meichel. So we can, it's automatically not possible to be part of Bishul Yisroel, to require Bishul Yisroel. Okay, so he's understanding that. It doesn't say this did, but it doesn't say preferers, but he's just like Oleh Shulchan Aruch tells us that it has to be a chashuv of food. We can give other ways of figuring out that food is not chashuv and include them, so to speak, into not Oleh Shulchan Aruch. So he says, so therefore sugar and salt are not Oleh Shulchan Aruch. I'll read you some of his words. He says, since the sugar and the salt are not eaten by themselves, I skipped one. You would never eat it by itself, only as a tafel. And he makes a dimion to the dinim. I think the things have to be Oleh Shulchan Aruch. Okay, so here also the reason why you would say the water chestnuts don't need Bishul Yisroel is because if no one ever eats them by themselves, here we have a little variation. No one ever eats them by themselves al Shulchan Aruch, then that food is obviously can't be a chashuv food. So it's all like understood that food is not even al Shulchan Aruch because it's not chashuv because no one eats it by itself. Okay, the fact that you snack on it is probably the same thing as people who snack on sugar. I mean, probably people who eat sugar nowadays is what?
Sugar cube.
Sugar cube, and he was thinking about candies. I could see he has little kids. So he's thinking about, so people eat that, right? People eat it nowadays. You might eat it as a food by itself, but no one eats it as Shulchan Aruch, which is like the water chestnuts. People might eat them by itself, but it has as a meichel chashuv, no one ever eats it by itself.
Does it mean that's how they eat it in China?
Okay, that does make a difference. We talked about the child way back when. About what would happen if there they ate it al Shulchan Aruch and we didn't. Yes, that would be. And you're saying is that in order to decide the shaila, someone has to understand what's going on there also, right? That part of the shaila is to understand wherever they make these things in Thailand or China or India, I don't know wherever they get them from. So yes, okay, that's true.
Final result? Wasn't it where you are? It makes a difference?
I don't remember it anymore. I'll have to go listen to myself. Okay, now let's start the Rambam. There's a few things in the Rambam. The Rambam says like this: Mutter lechal afunim kluyim. You can eat. If you want to look on, you can eat roasted beans or something to that effect. What?
Yeah, beans. Beans.
Your beans, okay, it says in Tafel, it's beans. So you could eat roasted beans that come. So on the arbis, you could also eat cooked arbis, roasted arbis. The animal al shulchan that they're not toasted, that they're not al shulchan. Okay, so that you're allowed to eat these things if they're not al shulchan. So this is brought as a raya. This part of the Ramah is brought as a raya to the question we talked about. We mentioned it a few minutes ago. We talked about it a few times ago, which is if you have a food that could be prepared in one way that's Oleh Shulchan Aruch, one way that's not Oleh Shulchan Aruch, doesn't need Bishul Yisroel. And this is brought as an example because here the Ramah is saying that you could eat toasted beans because they're not Oleh Shulchan Aruch. Okay? Yet in Kuf Yud Beis Halacha Aleph, the Ramah said that if you had pas made of bean flour, if it's Oleh Shulchan Aruch, you can't eat it, and if it's not Oleh Shulchan Aruch, you can eat it. So what's the difference? How come the bread made out of bean flour, let me say that. It could be, he's saying to you it could be, that bread made out of bean flour could need Bishul Yisroel, but toasted beans would not need Bishul Yisroel. What's the difference? What's not what the difference is, but that tells you that the same food in two different forms, one way is Oleh Shulchan Aruch, one way is not. One way needs Bishul Yisroel, one way doesn't. Okay, that's brought as a raya. One of the rayas, it's not a foolproof raya, but it's one of the rayas that if you have the same food prepared in different ways, in potato chips or broiled potatoes.
Fries good for potato chips too?
Because?
I mean, because you make two madrigas, right? You make two madrigas of difference.
Yeah.
Almost like
different ways, right? So I'm saying it's a right to the case we were just talking about. But the bread made out of bean flour.
It's potato chips. It's a right that potato chips.
Yeah, well, potato chips are fried as opposed to what's Oleh Shulchan Aruch is roasted potatoes. Okay, those are two quite different ways of preparing the food. Which is like here, bread out of bean flour and toasted beans are.
Fried potatoes are Oleh Shulchan Aruch?
I don't think so. Probably like French fries.
No, the sliced potatoes that you bake or fry in a pan with oil. Those are almost, they're not potato chips, but they're a little bit crunchy. Those are a fancy dish that they serve.
In the previous year, you made two madrigas. And you said some are, what were those two madrigas?
For this kind of food?
In foods that are Oleh Shulchan Aruch and in one form, you said there are two madrigas.
Oh, you mean it's whether does kings eat them at all, or do they eat them at a state dinner?
No.
A different shower. Okay.
These two madrigas are, you know what I'm talking about? Two madrigas are different. Yeah, you said, a food could in one form or another be Oleh Shulchan Aruch, but then it's like a totally different type of form, and that's pasha that almost everybody names on it that you can't, just because this is us or this considered Oleh Shulchan Aruch and the other one is not, but then it's something that's or potato chips, which is not so pasha, but even then it'll make it.
Go look back at the notes. Have Kashrus. Okay, fine. The next thing is, I'm sorry, I remember. Yes.
Curiosity. Bean flour. How do you make bread out of bean flour, or is that just an ingredient?
How do you make bread out of it?
No. If bean flour becomes a bread, or bean flour is in addition to the regular flour.
No. It's without wheat flour. It's bean flour is made of it. Right. Okay. Next thing, there's another diuk in the Ramah also, which is this is from the Chalkus Binyamin. It says like this. He says, beans. I don't know about all of them, but most of them, when you harvest them, when they're fresh, they're nechachai. You could eat them. But we think of beans as being not nechachai, which is what the Ramah is talking about. Is because the way you preserve beans is you dry them out. If they're dry, they can stay for a long time. Then when you want to cook them, then you can't eat them raw. They're not nechachai anymore. Like the beans that are going into today's challenge, they're dried out, so they have to be cooked. You can't eat them as is. So you see from here that if you have a food that was once edible raw, and then you did something that made it now it's not edible raw anymore, like these beans, you dried them out, they're not edible raw anymore, and then you want to cook them, now they need Bishul Yisroel.
Are they dried or do they dry them?
I don't know how they're dried, but when they come off the ground, when you take them off the ground, they're edible. Okay? In most beans, I don't know if every single bean, but most beans, when you take them off, think about peas.
They're pods, right?
Yeah, think about peas. When you eat them, they're nechachai. Okay, and this din is really negated till later. It's on the halacha test. We'll talk about it. That shiloh about it. What happens if food changes from nechachai to not nechachai? It's negated halacha test. But he just makes a diuk over here, which is an appropriate diuk, that here's this case of beans, and Ramah is talking about whether it is or it's not Oleh, but nechachai doesn't occur to him that it's nechachai. Okay, next. Then he says, "V'chein nagu behem heter." Also, the makel to eat them. Im loy b'moker shenagu limshach hamachlas b'chelev, except in places where they grease the pans with fat. She'oz no yimid. Then you don't eat them because, of course, they're betrayed. Okay, then you're being to betrayed not because of b'shlakim, but because they use chelev. Alpha blava chishari. If they don't grease the pans with fat, you're allowed to eat them. The person who cooked the food for you probably cooked other foods in his pot also, right? He's not a Jewish person. You're buying it from a guy. He might have not greased the beans with flour, maybe with fat, maybe to something else. The Eilocha claims, well, don't worry about the Keilim, the Stam Keilim, because the Stam Keilim are in we're going to get back to that in a second, what he just said about that. Okay? The last part of the Chol Pri Shenecha Commercial Chai, any fruit which is Nechal Chai, which is pretty common, most fruits are Nechal Chai. Even though the guy cooked it, Tafel, and it disintegrated and it became into some other food, it's mutter. And that's why we're allowed to eat. The Chacham Shem says it means cherry jelly. The guy make because even and the Ramah is pointing out over here is that even though you have a food that the guy, what he did do it, changed the food very dramatically. He took a food that was a cherry, okay, or some other fruit, and he cooked it to the point that it liquefied, and then it solidified into a jelly. He made a whole different food out of it. Even so, we still say it's considered nechachai. You could eat the food raw. The fact that he changed the food very dramatically doesn't make it to be considered as if it was not nechachai or something like that, and it's still mutter. Okay, now, what the Ramah said in passing about the Stam Keilim and B'nei is, of course, not over here. Not again to Bishul. I just want to mention one machlokes about Stam Keilim and B'nei, which is negate to the way we use it. The truth is, mainly use Stam Keilim and B'nei, not for buying something from a guy. Usually we use it for a Jew, which is the next in Kuf Chaf Beis, where it's brought, is Stam Keilim and B'nei applies to a Jew also. I mean, you cook something in a fleshik pot, and you cook something in a fleshik pot, you assume the pot is Ein Ben Yamin. Okay? Unless you know otherwise, you assume Stam Keilim or Ein Ben Yamin. But for buying from a guy, it's not such a common case. I mean, they used to buy beans, but we have it negated to buying from a factory. Okay? You want to buy food made in a non-Jewish factory, and you know all the ingredients are kosher. So would you say, or are there times that you can say, Stam Keilim and B'nei Yamin, you could assume the pots are not kosher? Or a company made a mistake. They were supposed to cook something and they made kosher food on a tray for line. Would you say Stam Keilim and B'nei Yamin? Okay, so there's the Pri Chodesh in Hilchos Pesach brings some machlokes. The Ran says like this. The Ran brings a Ramban who says when we say Stam Keilim and B'nei Yamin does not apply to a knife used for shechita. He says a knife that you would use for shechita, you use it pretty regularly. And if you have a knife like that, you use it. So since you use it pretty regularly, how can you say it's Ein Ben Yamin? Why would you think it's Ein Ben Yamin? You use it pretty regularly. So Stam Keilim and B'nei Yamin only would apply like in your house. In my house, you have 5 pots. So every pot you could assume is Ein Ben Yamin. I don't use every pot every day, so I could look at a pot and assume a Stam pot is Ein Ben Yamin. There's 10 spoons in my drawer, which I don't know which one I used last night for fleshings, but but I can assume that I didn't because there's enough spoons in there that most of them are probably Ein Ben Yamin. That's the Ramban holds. And the Ran himself holds. The Ran himself argues, and he says no. He says, except in the most extreme cases, where it's like almost for sure that the person used it all the time, we still say Stam Keilim and B'nei Yamin, even though the guy who uses the equipment seems to use it pretty regularly. And the Ran doesn't explain this part, but I'm connecting it to the earlier part of the Ran. That the Ran says that the rule of Stam Keilim and B'nei Yamin is not an independent stama. It's an assumption that it's Ein Ben Yamin. It's really that it's built on many sfeikas. One suffix is maybe it's Ein Ben Yamin. And you probably know this. The other suffix is maybe the food that was cooked in there is lefkam to this food. I mean, let's say last night you made meat, and today I'm making vegetable soup. Maybe meat is lefkam to vegetable soup. So it's another reason to think it's mutter. Not maybe the pot wasn't used for 24 hours, and even if it was, maybe the thing that was made previously is not lefkam to this food. Is lefkam to this food. And another suffix he mentions is maybe the last food that was made in it within the last 24 hours was heter. I mean, let's say in our case, you're buying food from a guy. So the fact that he uses it all the time, well, maybe the last thing he used it for was for heter. Okay, so therefore, in the Ran says there are sveikas harbi. There are many sveikas that can make it mutter. So if we have a food cooked in a pot, we assume that the food is mutter, and we use the terminology Stam Keilim and B'nei Yamin. What we really need to say is the food is mutter because there's lots of sveikas to be matter the food, but the evet, unless you know that there was a problem. Okay, so which is very negate to a factory. Okay, factories cook food, 8 hours a day. They're running all the time. So it's hard to say in a factory, Stam Keilim that could you think that they didn't use it for 24 hours? I mean, come on. They could make it on Monday. Yeah, it could have been made on Monday morning, but you wouldn't say Stam. According to the Ramban, you wouldn't say Stam the Keilim. According to the Ran, there's what declared. The Ran says there are many sveikas, and those sveikas apply to the companies just as well. Maybe the last food they made was lafkam. Maybe the last food was heter. There are plenty of sveikas to consider. So I've just mentioned for the machlokes of it. I don't know what the din is on that. I know that in food service applications, this I've heard from poskim, that in food service applications, you wouldn't say stam keilim and minyan. You walk into the back of a restaurant, every pot and every cooking utensil has been used. Is used all the time. You don't say stam keilim and minyan on that. They're so busy cooking, there's so much going on, it's not like in your own kitchen. Whether it would apply in a factory, that I'm not sure. I'm not sure how much we can connect. I mean, it's totally in this machlokes, and I don't know what the din is in that machlokes. Okay. One last thing, just for the interest of it, it's related, is the machaber, when he brings the din of stam keilim and minyan, he's talking about what you can do and he says, when you're buying from a person who's a professional, whose job it is to make this food, you have more reasons to be makel. What the case he's being makel about is not yet. You have more reasons to be makel, and that is because the person who's making the food commercially, he is very makbid that his keilim should be clean, and that he should maybe even dedicate keilim for certain things. He doesn't want to spoil the taste of one food with the taste of another food. So they're very particular about their keilim, and therefore there's more reasons to be makel and assume that the keilim ain't been yom. Okay, that's what the Mechaber says, and then he ends off. This is the unusual part. He ends off and says like this. He says, but Baal Nefesh, Yachush, a Baal Nefesh should be machmir and not assume Stam Keilim and Binyamin, even by this, like a professional. Shedvar Elu Mevin Lidei Tyru Unikiyas. Okay, not your usual words coming out of Shulchan Aruch, because being machmir on these kind of things, Mevin Lidei Tyru Unikiyas, that even though we have all kinds of assumptions and could probably and all kinds of reasons to make being more particular and being makbid that the keilim should be actually kosher. Thank you.